welcome everyone. We've got a very exciting Breakeven tasting on tonight with Darren Peck from Morris.
Hi.
But we're very, very excited to be able to do these Breakeven tastings because it gets more liquid into more people's hands and really spreading the word of brands that we love. And I've personally visited Morris Distillery, gosh, I think 3 times now. But yeah, so Darren Peck from Morris is joining us again. He's their head distiller. Darren's one of my favorite people and an absolute font of knowledge when it comes to distilling. And I'm very excited that we're getting the chance to try some new make spirit as well today. And Darren will take us through that. But before we get ahead of ourselves, just the usual housekeeping to go over. If you guys do have 5 glasses, you could probably get away with 4, considering the last one on the tasting is a Muscat fortified wine and probably doesn't need breathing room. But if you do have enough glassware for all of them, we recommend pouring them out so you can go back and compare each dram if you've got the glassware for it. Obviously, don't drive after drinking and all that usual stuff. These whiskies aren't as high in ABV, but we still want to make sure that we're promoting responsible drinking. All of our tastings are recorded as well, so for anyone who couldn't make it or wants to watch it back, they will all be on our YouTube, and Ollie will send through the link after the tasting. It's a big group tonight, so if you've got any questions or tasting notes, please pop them in the chat. We always love hearing what you guys are tasting, and especially with the new launch release that we've got today. And yeah, I will try and get any answers for any questions. I'll do my best when they come through in the chat. I think that's everything covered though. So I'll hand it over to you, Darren, to start us off by telling us a little bit about Morris and talking us through the new make spirit in our first dram.
Thank you very much, Emma. Hello and welcome everybody. I normally joke, first of all, that if you don't understand my accent, don't worry, Emma can translate and we'll put translation notes in later. So welcome to the tasting. I'm going to give you a very brief history, and I am going to keep it very brief on the history of Morris. And then what we'll do is I'll talk through how we came about up to the point of this still, and then we'll get into some liquid. So Morris Wines set off in 1859. It set off in Rutherglen. Though Rutherglen wasn't called Rutherglen back then, it actually had a different name because it was Gold Rush era. And in the Gold Rush, the Morrises realised that they could sell wine to the miners. It was thirsty work digging in the soil for that gold. And so they were selling wine to miners. And what they actually did is he realised that he could make more money if he planted his own vineyards. So if you ever look at our badge, it's a barrel over a horse. Now, a horse is actually called Fairfield, and that was a champion steeplechaser and was sold, and the money was used to plant the first vineyards. Obviously, the barrel is self-explanatory, but we will come on to the barrel in a little bit. Let's fast forward now to 2016. 2016, Morris Winery is going to close. My boss is really passionate about Australian wine. He owns a number of wineries, and he couldn't let this close. So what he actually did was he bought it to save it. Why was he my boss? Well, my background is alcohol. I've been making alcohol since I left university when I did postgraduate brewing and distilling. And I literally had worked my way around the world. So by the time my boss offered me a job in Australia, when I looked at my CV, I suddenly realised that I'd made alcohol on every inhabited continent bar Australia. So you were the last people I had to get drunk. So I took the job and came down to Australia to get you drunk. Obviously responsibly drunk. So I came down to Australia 2012. I've been working around in Australia, doing new products, doing innovation, working on spirits. And then we bought Morris Wines. And Morris Wines, when we bought it, save it shutting down, but I suddenly found all these fabulous fortified barrels, and we'll come on to those later. But I actually rang my boss and said, you won't believe it, you know, we want to make a whiskey. I've just found you all the barrels you could possibly want for finishing this whiskey. And then I walked out the back, and outside the back, I found a 1933 copper pot still. And this is where I'll slow down a bit, because what is a copper pot still? It's a copper pot still. It's an hybrid still. So that means you've got a copper pot, then you've got a tall column, and that column has plates in it. And the reason that existed was to make fortification spirit. So fortification spirit is the spirit you add to the partially fermented grape juice that comes and becomes fortified wine. That is then put into barrels. And I'll explain a bit more about that just before we taste the Grand Muscat. But we found this still. Now, the still, to be honest, had been abandoned. And the reason it had been abandoned was twofold. Number one, unfortunately, economy meant in the 70s and 80s, it was actually cheaper to buy in fortifying spirit than making it yourself. And the other rumour, though Morris's were never involved, was there was a lot of grappa on the market. And the ATO weren't very happy about how much grappa was on the market, seeing as there was no grappa distilleries in existence. So they shut it down. So the still was there, and we brought that still back. So when I say it was there, it was still in its original position. It was built by hand in 1933 in Adelaide. It was installed in 1941. And like I said, it had been abandoned, and the galahs had moved in. So we moved on the galahs. We took the still to pieces because they used certain materials in the 30s that we wouldn't use now, especially for heat proofing. And we removed all that material and made sure there was no traces. We then moved out the pigeons, and eventually we shooed away the spiders. And we brought this beautiful machine back to life, and we actually called the machine Aurora. And the reason we called her Aurora is she was a sleeping beauty, and we did wake her up. Now, what do I mean by a copper pot still? I've told you it's a still. That still will hold about 3,400 litres of a mix of heads, tails, and fresh low wines. We then have internal steam coils, copper coils, very, very same as the originals. And what will happen is we'll boil it up and it will go up the column. Now, the interesting thing is I have just restored this distillery. So the number of sensors I have to say that there's no alcohol in the area, and the lights have to be totally safe so they can't cause an explosion. And it's unbelievable the length you have to go to because it's ethanol. And next to the boiler on the floor, I've left it, is the burn mark from the original boiler installed in 1933. So literally in the old days, you could have the distillery, boiler, and the still next door to each other. These days, obviously, it's got to be separated. Health and safety has moved on, and for the good, for the better. But we've got this copper pot still, and it's boiling ethanol. So I don't know if people know how ethanol boils, but the actual boiling point of pure ethanol is around 76 to 78 degrees centigrade, depending on atmospheric pressure. When you mix it with water, something happens called hydrogen bonding, which makes those boiling points change. So you've got to put energy in to get this stuff to boil. And when it goes up that column, what it does is, in the old days, there would be plates at each column stage. So if you're making rectification spirit, what happens is your spirit moves up, it hits your first plate, it causes a film of liquid which condenses on that plate. Your vapor then comes up again, and what it actually does is it boils off the top layer of that liquid and underfills the liquid with fresh liquid. So it keeps the layer of liquid, but it's just evaporated more onto the next plate, onto the next plate, onto the next plate. What that actually means is each one of those plates acts as a distinct distillation. Now, that's great if you're making rectification spirit. It's how vodka columns work. Vodka columns will have 98 plates because each one is a distillation step, so each one makes that spirit purer. So you're getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner and cleaner and cleaner ethanol, which is great for fortification. It's not so good for whiskey because in whiskey, you want congeners. You want some of those other materials other than ethanol. So although your ethanol is boiling at 76, what you'll find is on your still, when it starts to boil, you get your heads. And those heads will have a tiny touch of what smells like acetone. You have a lot of isolamyl acetate, which is actually a congener what smells of bananas. And when we used to have the old piping, when you first started up, the entire area smelled of bananas for about 2 minutes because that's one of the first things to boil off and it's very volatile. You get then into the hearts and you're bringing over other congeners, you're bringing over other materials. And what I did is I worked with a guy called John McDougall. And although I'd worked on spirits all over the world, I got John to help me look at the number of plates we needed. And when I say needed, and we'll come on to this in a little bit, is you've got to remember the climate where I am. So my climate is not Scotland. My climate is Alpine Victoria, which means yesterday I scraped frost off my car, and in summer it will be 41 degrees centigrade. Now, Scotland will range from about -6 to about 28 if they're lucky. So the temperature range for their maturation is much smaller than mine. What you also know is that every 10 degrees centigrade doubles a biological reaction. The same is true of chemical reactions. It doesn't quite double, but the hotter it is, the faster the chemical reaction. So your barrel is going to mature that new made spirit quicker in our barrels. So we have to get the new made spirit right for our climate. And I think that's a good point to actually taste the new made spirit.
I think John was asking for some photos of the still. I'm bad at technology, but I think I can pull up some. Here we are. So that's one of the photos of the still. So the top part goes much more like a column style, and you've got the pot and you've got a little bit of a bulb neck in the center there, but yeah, I think
so yeah, that's a 3,400 litre pot. When we boil it, we'll boil off negligible heads. That's the column. It's probably one of the highest stills there is. It's actually higher than the highest in Scotland.
So closer to like a Polish or Russian vodka still?
Yeah, you're getting there, but we've taken the plates out to make sure we don't rectify it too much.
Yeah.
So what's coming over on that? So if you have the new make spirit, the first thing you'll smell is grain. So there's a malt there. There's a very, very subtle malt, and that's hidden behind the sweetness, and it's very estery. And why is it very estery? Well, I actually use a proprietary blend of 2 yeasts to make sure my new made is estery. And why do I want esters? Because your barrel's going to mature very quickly. So you need the esters there in the first place to mature out quicker. If you don't have enough esters to start with in my sort of climate, you'll end up with a very, very thin, very over astringent, more barrel extract. And you won't have the congeners and the esters to balance that flavour. And whiskey, like any other beverage, is all about balance. So when you get your nose into this spirit, you're also picking up a little bit of caramel
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like when you so I do a lot of baking and there's a lot of weird experimental stuff. I do not recommend looking at TikTok baking hacks. They're quite dangerous, but there's ones where people melt Werthers on like foil and stuff. And I always tend to get foil from a lot of new make spirits, and they usually end up being some of my favorite whiskeys. But yeah, it's like somebody melted Werther caramels on aluminium foil.
Yeah, and there's a lot of caramel there. There's still a little bit, a touch of that banana.
Mm.
There's a lot of almost tropical fruit, and that's your esters. That's all esters coming over and coming top. Now, when you taste it, and I don't suggest taking a gulp, you can feel the alcohol, you can feel the buzz, but it leaves a sweetness in the mouth. And if you feel at the end, there's like a little bit of almost tailsy, but it isn't tails. That's your grain characters, that's your furfurols, that's what's going to develop in that barrel.
Yeah.
Pear is a good description. I saw pear come up at the bottom.
Yeah. Dave's kid said it smelled like pear. We don't condone 8-year-olds drinking. But yeah, Leo gets cereal notes. Ian reckons it's boiled cabbage water. I can kind of see that when you get those like purple cabbages and they're like a bit that they do the pH testing with purple cabbages, don't they? I think. Yeah, very much so.
But yeah, you can really see the complexity in there, and you can see the esters. And that's the main thing in this whiskey, is that you needed those esters to come over. And that's how you know we've got the plates right, because if we had too many plates, it will be too clean. You would actually start cutting some of these out. My guys cut 2 ways. We look at temperatures because that's a good guide, but my guys still can do the water test and still do the smell test. It's the best way to cook whiskey. And we're still very, very manual. So if you want to increase the steam on the still, you turn the steam valve. That's how we run. But that gives you this beautiful, beautiful new make, and it will come off the still anywhere between 73 and 78% ABV. We collect it, and on that 3,400 litre charge, I would look to collect between 600 and 700 litres. Then obviously I go into a really hard boil to boil the tails off back into collection, so that I get all the rest of the alcohol out, because by the time we're cutting off arts, I'm normally cutting off about 70%. So you've still got lots of ethanol there. We collect that, and that goes back into the start of the next charge, which we top up with fresh low wines. And we get about anywhere between 800 and 1,000 litres potleys, which we then dispose of.
Yeah, cool.
Any questions on the new make?
I love Nathan's call on coconut. It's definitely that like waxy coconut. Definitely getting that. Ian says it's fresh cut leather. I'm super curious. I've got a bit of a question. I know that you're not using as many plates because you don't want a super rectified spirit, but I know that some distillers don't like to say how many plates they put. You're not going to tell me, are you?
I'm not going to tell you, sorry. Well, I can tell you, if I've got too many, you end up with vodka. And I always joke that you can't make good whiskey from vodka. What you can make, if you put vodka in a barrel, is woody vodka.
Still better tasting than vodka, though, right?
Well, vodka's meant to be tasteless and colourless, so I don't understand how you distinguish them. But
I know. I always think vodka's just whiskey with wasted potential, you know?
That's it.
Awesome.
Okay. So yeah, so that's our new make. Really specific to us, really designed for us, and it was designed for our barrels. And I'm actually going to go on to the barrels now, because this spirit was set up to mature in a certain type of barrel. And how did we know what that barrel was? Well, I brought another expert down from Scotland called Jim Swan. Now, unfortunately, he passed away just after completing our project. He'd worked on whiskies such as Kavlan, he'd worked on other whiskies, And what he was very good at was looking at the toasting and shaving regime on wine barrels to make them well or good at maturing whiskey in hot climate. And we're hot climate. Even though I'm -4 yesterday, I'm hot in the summer. And that's what that was about. So he was very good. So we worked with him and came up with a proprietary shaving and toasting regime. Now, we had a lot of input into that. And one of the things was, I'm not that big a fan of pure wine influence in whiskey. So I wanted to make sure we'd shaved away that contamination. Or contamination, is that the right word? Probably not. I wanted to shave away those flavors so that when my new make went in, it got the best chance of maturing into a great whiskey. We cut the whiskey, the new make, back to about 63.5. Why did I pick 63.5? I didn't. The Scots have done a lot of work over many hundreds of years. And what you'll find about new make is you'll find that some American distillers actually fill at a lower ABV. And that's because the lower the ABV, the more flavour you pick up from a barrel. Now, when you're trying to do a bourbon and you want all that vanillin and isovanillin, so it's sweet and woody, that's what you do. That's fine. That means that you get more extract from low alcohol. The thing the Scots are good at, though, is economy. And the difference between storing 60% and 30% is double the number of sheds you need. So they'd worked out that 63.5 was perfect for the number of sheds you have to build, but the extract you get over a number of years. And they'd done all that work over hundreds of years, so I was not going to reinvent the wheel. So I cut my spirit to 63 as well. We then put it into our first barrels, which are maturation barrels. They're a mixture of French and American ex-wine. We have our own wineries in the Coonawarra and the Barossa, so some great wines being emptied out of these barrels. They then go to our own cooper. We actually employ 2 coopers and built a cooperage to keep control of everything, especially that toasting recipe. From the cooperage, they come to me, and then we fill the new made spirit. We put them away for maturation. Legally, it's 2 years in Australia. We're running about 3 to 4. I taste each batch regularly, and sometimes some batches will be faster than other batches just because of that temperature. When were they laid down? Has it had 2 summers or 2 winters? Remember, you're driving whiskey into the wood, you're driving whiskey out of the wood, which is a diurnal effect, but also chemical reactions get faster the hotter you are. So in hot summers, if you've had 2 hot summers on a whiskey, it's going to mature slightly different to if you've had 2 cold winters and 1 hot summer. So you have to look at how it's maturing. I taste them, and when they're ready, I marry them together. So we marry different barrels in different ratios, depending what I'm looking to produce. And marrying them together, I make a married whiskey, and then I'll put it into a finishing cask. Now, finishing cask is one of our fabulous fortified wine casks. So those fortified wines were absolutely world famous for Muscat. You're going to taste the Muscat at the end of the tastings. Muscat, we've actually won the best in the world twice now. We just got Fortified Producer Club, best fortified producer in the world in London again this year. So that means we're beating the sherries and we're beating the ports. But one of them I laid down was Tokay. Now, Tokay was laid down, and last year, about a year ago, we did a launch with the Whiskey Club of the barrels I had laid down. And it went phenomenally well. People loved it. It won a double gold at San Francisco. It won a SIP award, platinum, and it just did brilliantly. But I thought, well, this can be reborn. So I put some more down in wood. But what I thought to myself to finish, so I took spirit. I wanted to tweak it slightly. I knew I could do a slightly different take on Tokay. It's very similar, but there is a difference. So what I did is I used a little bit more char, because those chars will help, that char on the wood will help balance the tannins, but it also helps balance some of the floral notes you're going to get from the Tokay fortified. I also used a lot more French wood, because French wood actually gives you more tannins. So when you look at American and French barrels, and I say I mix them together differently, American is mainly vanilla driven, French is mainly tannin driven. So what we did is we put this together. I've put this reborn Tokay together. We've sent it to San Fran and we won a double gold. So it's still great whiskey. What you'll find though is on the nose, you're picking up a little bit more char this time, a little bit more smoke, but those beautiful muscadel flavors are still there. And when I say muscadel, that's because muscadel is the grape what's used to make Tokay. Muscadel has two fates in life. It can become Tokay, a beautiful fortified wine, or it can become Moscato. And there's those floral notes you get in Moscato, and let's be honest, it's really easy drinking because of that floral sweetness, and that's coming from the muscadel grape. And if you concentrate really hard, you can see some of those floral notes still there. When you taste it, you've got the sweetness, which coats the mouth, but this time I've used that tannin to try to just shorten the sweetness a little bit so it just disappears smoothly. Still one of my signatures on any whiskey I produce is, Emma's heard this too many times now, but I don't like being hurt by whiskey. I think whiskey should go down and not hurt you. You should actually know you've not drunk it, so you have another. And that's what I think this whiskey really does. Emma, I think this is the first time you've tasted this reborn, or second?
Yes, maybe, because I remembered tasting the Whiskey Club release under the table at the distillery.
That was my own bottle I'd bought.
It was excellent. And yeah, I think I tasted this one again recently, and it's excellent. There's like barely marginal differences between the two, but yeah, it's so good. I will say I've got a few questions in the chat. Charlene was asking before from the new make, will you potentially bottle new make in the future like other distilleries have done?
We are considering it. It will probably be cellar door only when our new cellar door is finally finished. But yes, it's something we are looking at doing. So watch this space. But obviously, I'd want to select my new make quite carefully as well. They actually all taste very, very similar. But obviously, if you're going to bottle it, you're going to have to then decide what alcohol do you cut it down to. Does it balance at that? Do you get the same effect? But yeah, it's something we are looking at.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool. Even like smaller format bottles, and if they have like the date of distillation on them, would be real fun. Because I know, look, some people have those like little mini casks at home. I know David's got one, which he filled with the worst kind of Aldi port. But you never know, someone might make a bulk order. And Nathan was asking if you have a personal preference for which cask type, like which oak type you like to work with, French or American. I know, even though I don't work with the casks, I have a particular palate for American over French oak.
Yes, you probably do. Most people do like that sweetness, that vanilla. It actually, I wouldn't say I have a preference. It depends what I've got in my head, where I want to take that whiskey. And I know if I'm going to take it to something what's as delicate and as floral as this Tokay is, I'm going to have to put more French so that the American doesn't overwhelm the flavors.
Mhm.
Whereas if I'm doing my muscat barrel where I want some sweetness on top of the muscat sweetness, then I'm looking to use American to balance out that French. So you'll end up with a blend of both. If I go in the future, something really sweet, I'll skew it to the American side. So, and that's before it goes into finishing. That's just the maturation barrel. Your maturation barrel then feeds into your finishing. What you select as your finishing barrel then influences the whiskey again. So if anybody's ever tasted our signature, very easy drinking. The reason it is I put it actually through a muscat barrel for a very short time and a very young muscat barrel. So that means that it's still very floral. So when muscat is young, it's very floral and out there. And it just smooths off the edges of that whiskey. And that's why people have told me my signature is slightly dangerous, because you can just drink it. When it comes to the muscat barrel, the muscat barrel finish, which we've tasted before, but what is used in the smoked, then you look at an older muscat. So that's got more of the darker fruits, the stone fruit, the plums, the sultanas, it's Christmas cake, and that will influence your whiskey a different way as well.
Oh. The dangerously easy to drink whiskeys, I always call them my straw whiskeys, because just stick a straw in it and I'm good. But yeah, I love the tasting notes you guys have. Delicate woody, gentle char. Yeah, I think your signature is that char kind of smoke. Ian was wondering if that comes from the barrel char.
It's all barrel char.
All barrel char, yeah.
We don't use smoked malts. We don't use any peat, because all our ingredients are 100% Australian. So I know there's peat coming through. I don't think it's quite ready yet. So what I do is I go and we look at how do we do things using Australian ingredients. I could buy peated malt from Scotland, but it's not Australian.
Yeah. And there isn't anyone doing any Australian peated unless they've got their own peat reserves.
Yeah,
yeah, which is
and again, there's a slight difference. So when you peat malt in Scotland, it's wet.
Mhm.
So it's actually part of the drying process. So it really gets ingrained into the grain, where a lot of people are using malt. So it's more of a smoked malt, but it's peat smoked malt rather than peated malt. I always make a slight distinction.
Yeah, fair enough. Dave was saying Lime Bonus does. Yes, Lime Bonus has their own reserves from Margaret River, but there's no like malting houses, essentially, as far as I'm aware, in Australia doing anything peated. Leo was saying that he wants it a bit higher than 50% ABV, please, because he's an absolute sucker for cask strength. I'm sure is not an uncommon.
There may be a cask strength eventually.
Yeah. But yeah, butterscotch on the nose, sweet chocolate and spice, sultana and raisins. Yeah, super good. Ian's saying it's darn fine. Yeah, it's such a great, just like a great profile and just easy drinking, like you said. And I want to say, is there going to be other interesting casks? Because I know that there was a another fortified wine that I've got a bottle of somewhere.
Yeah, we are looking.
I still have any left.
I truly believe I taste my things when they're in the finishing casks. I'm still tasting them. Some things are ready, some things aren't ready. Some things may never be ready. And if they're never ready, they go to shed 3 and we pretend they don't exist, because they really will come back eventually. But things take time. So yes, there are other casks looked at. Yes, we have got other things laid down. No, we don't have a Coca-Cola barrel, but but yes, we have got interesting things laid down. But it's when they're ready, because I am passionate and John is passionate that we never release anything that's not worthy of being in that label.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, Hugh got a quick question, just a little bit doubling back. And actually, it's a really interesting one regarding your still, because obviously it's a fortified still. And the differences between that and a Lomond still. Is it that a Lomond still is a bit squatter? And
It's
it's
a bit
not as well.
squatter, it's got a much smaller column.
Yeah.
This has
shorter.
got a real true rectification column. Like I
Okay.
said, it's taller than the tallest in Scotland,
Yeah. Yeah.
without naming names.
It's so interesting to kind of see like mild, slight physical changes change the name of a still. Like you look at an alembic still and you're like, I mean, it's kind of just a pot still with a big onion neck, right? And it's not, it's an alembic still and it's used for cognac.
Yeah.
But you know, there's slight differences make a world of difference with the end result, which is
And a lot of it came down to the technology of the countries at the time. So the most famous one is champagne, which first fizzy wines were actually bottled probably in the UK rather than in France because they had the glass technology. So they could make the bottles. And it's same with the stills. It's the technology what was available for making the stills, which has influenced Scottish stills and lambic stills and all these stills throughout time, is what they could do when they did it.
Yeah, it's crazy to see. And still crafting is a whole another thing, especially with, you know, having to patch it up and all
And
that.
you hear the stories of there's a dent, so they put the dent back in, and
Yeah.
whether that's true or not, we'll never know.
Like those cars, you just, you know, put a plunger on it and then pull it out and it takes a dent out, right?
That's what they say.
Well, I think, so you've told us a little bit about Tokay. Now, I know sherry is a AOC, DOC kind of thing. So
Yes.
tell us about the sherry barrel.
It's a paira, obviously. So we make a paira. We're one of the few full fortified wines left, fortified wineries left. So what that means is we make everything. We make a paira, Tokay, port, vintage port, and muscat. This is our paira. Now, before you taste this, I'm going to give you a warning. Do not expect a massive Scottish sherry bomb. It's not. It's our paira. Now, anybody who's tasted my muscat whiskey knows that we've got a nice big sweet whiskey out there. So I did something different. What we actually make is a very, very fino. It's a very dry sherry. What we then do is put some of that dry sherry into older casks, and we call that the aged amber paira. It's those aging casks that I can use some of those for finishing this whiskey. And so when you taste this whiskey, it's totally different to that sweetness. It's going to, on the nose, I always describe it as nutty, dry. You can almost, some of the aldehydes from the sherry barrel have got in there. And then on the flavor, it's dry again, it's short, it's quite tannic without being overly tannic, but you get citrus coming through, and that citrus seems to wash everything away and goes down smooth at the end. Again, it's up a little bit higher, so it's up at about 46% ABV, but that alcohol is quite easily absorbed in the complexity, but it's a dry complexity rather than a sweet complexity.
Yeah, it's super, you can kind of like feel the earthy char. I think Ian's got it, that hay shed, farm shed, lanolin kind of thing. It's definitely like really present. It is not a typical sherry bomb.
No, but it's our sherry, our paira. And I say it's ours because each bodega in Spain has its own fleur. And the fleur is the bacterium, yeast and mold in the air, what forms the layer, what turns wine into sherry. Our vineyard is in Mia. So this is known as the Mia fleur because only the environment of Mia has exactly this flavour to make this sherry. Nobody else can make this sherry.
Yeah, Nathan says a sweet, smoky citrus. It's so with fortified wine, obviously it's something we talk about in whiskey in terms of the finishing and stuff. But fortified wine production in Australia has been massive since what, the early 1800s or something?
Yeah, so we set off in 1859 until really the 50s, maybe the 60s, but started in the 50s. It started moving towards table wine. So Mick Morris, who is Dave Morris' father, Dave Morris is our present winemaker, he pioneered Giriffe as a table wine. The reason being is Giriffe had been planted back in the 1800s after phylloxera, but it was for ports. It was for fortified wines because these wines were being produced primarily for the military, and for people who lived in the outback and lived. You're in country areas. You want something that you can store. You don't want some delicate table wine that if you get the temperature wrong, it's not drinkable. Fortified wines were robust. So Australia was a fortified wine producing nation until that switch in the 50s, 60s, faster in the 70s. By the 80s, you're known for your table wines. And that was the change. Fortified wines, though, and we will come on to them. I'll actually talk about fortified wines now. I know we've got the smoked muscat to go. And I think if we do the smoked muscat very quickly, and then I'll talk about the fortified wines themselves, because it's a fascinating process.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Obviously, the smoked muscat in and of itself is also very fascinating. And not just concept, but execution for something like that to be able to be made, obviously, without peat. So, yeah, if you guys...
Yeah, if we go on to the smoked muscat, then I'll tell you the story of the smoked muscat. And then what we'll do is we'll taste the fortified, and I'll tell you all about fortifieds while we sip on a fortified wine at the end. So smoked muscat came around partly because I am a bit of a peat fanatic. I love peat. I think even at 18, one of my favourite bottles was Lagavulin. And so I always love peat. I've got a guy who works with me who does more. I'm obviously, you can tell I'm the technical distiller. I've distilled for all my life. I've got a marketeer who told me that he hates peat. I tried to explain there was more than one type of peat, but he said, so can we do it Australian? And I said, let me show you. I can make a smoky whiskey for you. I didn't say peat. So what I actually did, and this is why it's a limited release, because I actually destroyed barrels doing this. And I've been told there's only so many barrels I'm allowed to destroy in a lifetime. But what I actually did is, I've told you we had our own cooper. So I sent the barrels up to my cooper, and I said to him, I said, do you know what a crocodile char is? And he looked at me as if I dropped off the face of the moon and said, of course I do. Why are you asking me that? I said, good, because I want you to get it to crocodile and then leave it on fire. And he said, but that'll destroy the barrel. I said, yeah, but only burn it so it's still integral. For we're going to have to put liquid in this afterwards. And we got there and he incinerated these barrels on the inside. That's the best way to describe it. And we do it all over open fire. So we actually build fires out of old barrels to toast the barrels. And when these ones are emptied, by the way, they went back and became firewood. That's all they were useful for. But what he did for me is I said, when it's safe to do so it can't be on fire still, but when it's safe to do so, I want the ends putting in. And as soon as it's cool enough, I want that bung in so that it traps all that acrid, burnt timber. I then brought it down to Rutherglen, and I filled a number of whiskies into it, but my best bet was muscat. My second best bet was the sherry. The sherry didn't mature quite as quickly as the muscat one did, but it's actually getting there now as that smoked sherry. It's near enough ready. It just took longer to round. But the muscat worked perfectly. And why would it work perfectly? Because muscat is sweet. You're going to see that. It picks up some of that. The muscat whiskey itself picks up some of those muscat flavors out of the wood. So I've got a really beautiful, sweet, sticky whiskey, almost like a sherry bomb, but with muscat. Put that with smoke. Now, I'm British, which means that I've been to about 3 barbecues in my life where it didn't rain. But I do understand that smoke and sweet go really well together. So this is not peated whiskey. It's not smoked malt either. We did not put smoke onto the malt. What we actually did is used our barrel knowledge to pick up smoke from a barrel. So when you smell it, the first thing you smell is campfire. That day after, that dead campfire, that lovely smell you've had the night before. You pick up a little bit of barbecue there, so when the barbecue's burning, and you also pick up something which I'm really scared of called bushfire. And when I smell this smell where I live, I just look to see where the fire is, but it's that Australian smell.
Yeah, it's such a, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, a smell that most Aussies will recognize, but it has that brightness and that kind of cleanness though to it. It reminds me of I was driving through Tassie bush, and I think it had been like a month or so after a bushfire came through, and you had all that dew and that new fresh vegetation growing. So there's that dewy cleanness through the charcoal. But I like to think that your Cooper was pulling that Star Trek line of I cannot push it any further.
That's it, yeah. I wish he was called Scotty.
Yeah, that would have been perfect.
Yeah. Well, you know, at the moment I'm looking at different barley. So at the moment we've always used Westminster and Gardner. I never said that. I should have said that. That's what we use at the moment. We actually planted one called Spartacus, which looks like it's going to be a great barley. Very high diastatic power, which is what you need for distilling. But my marketeer didn't like me saying that all I want is black labels on every bottle with Spartacus, I'm Spartacus, I'm Spartacus too. And that would be the only distinctions between them.
I'm sure you could like hide a small little lambda. As someone who is from the Spartan region in Greece, a little lambda hidden in there would be perfect.
But yeah, so this whiskey, going back to the smoked, you described it. It's that Australian. And I like to say my favourite line on this one is, I believe this is Australian smoke, it's not Scottish smoke. So I delivered on the promise of 100% Australian materials, but delivering an Australian smoke. Yeah.
And I love the tasting notes as well. Yeah, Ian, burnt tree branch in a bushfire pulled from a billabong and sniffed. Leo says it's hard to believe that it's char and not peat. And it smells like your hair, wool, and jumper after an evening sitting around a campfire. That is 100% accurate. Yeah, Ian's getting the subtle sticky sweetness as well behind the char. Nathan wants to know how many barrels have been destroyed for this venture so far.
Too many.
Too many?
Too many. No, limited. Like I said, it's limited because it does destroy the barrel. There is another one laid down, and like I said, it's very close. I'm getting quite excited about it because I might get 2 out of 2. It was such an experiment just to win an argument, and luckily, being the company we are, we get that freedom.
Awesome. Fair enough. Well, it is sad to know that there are barrels lost to the venture of this, but it was a worthy sacrifice.
It was a worthy sacrifice, very much like the Spartans.
Hugh is curious about if there's any chance of a cask strength version.
To be honest, what I always do in my whiskies is the alcohol is not picked for any other reason, that I believe that is where it balanced the best in the bottle.
Yeah, Fair enough. Well, we might move on to the final, not a whiskey, for the day, and I might run the poll in a few minutes as well. You can pick your top 2 favorites. So yes, you may pick the muscat as well if you're keen on the muscat alongside the whiskies. But yeah, we might talk a little bit about fortified wines. Yeah.
Okay, so fortified wine. I know a little bit of fortified wine. It is a fascinating thing when I learned this. Fortified wines in Australia, as you said, Australia was a big fortified market, had been all the way through to like the 50s, 60s. But fortified wines are really well controlled. So what you actually do is we take, for the muscat, we take the brown muscat grape. For the Tokay, we take the muscadel grape. And we crush them through a crusher like they're going to become a normal wine. And we put them in a fermenter. And we put some yeast there. And we let them ferment for about a day, that's all. So they only get about 4% alcohol. So you've got these really sweet grapes at 18 Beaumay and 4% alcohol. And what we do is we press them to get all that sugar and juice and that little bit of alcohol. And the reason we let them ferment a little bit is to get those fermentation characters. And then we eat them with a load of fortification spirit. Hence why we add a fortification still. That ethanol kills the yeast. We add sulfur dioxide to stop the fermentation. So now you've got this really alcoholic, sugary, grape-flavored stickiness. And we put it into a barrel. And it stays in that barrel and it matures just like whiskey does. So year in, year out, you get evaporation, you get wood effects. Like I said, a young muscat, really floral, for you still got lots of those grape notes. The older it gets, the darker and more intense and concentrated it gets. And what we are allowed to do is we are allowed to top up the alcohol. It's not like whiskey, so we can top up the alcohol to keep it protected. What we are not allowed to add is sugar. So for our 160th anniversary, we blended a special port. And it actually had liquid in it from the 1930s. So this means that it was actually early 30s was this wine, which means that when you drank that port, you were drinking sugar that grew in a grape in Rutherglen from Australian sunshine before the bodyline ashes tore, before man walked on the moon, before rock and roll. That sugar had existed before Elvis, and you were drinking it. Now, I normally say the joke about sugar over 10-year-old. My doctor tells me you doesn't have calories. But if anybody see my belly, everybody knows that's a lie, so I won't bother saying that. But that's sugar. So this one is a Grand Reserve. There is a classification. So we have Black Label, which is about 6 years old. We have Classic, which is 6 to 8 years old. You have Cellar Reserve, which is this one, the Grand Muscats, which are about 15 to 16 years old. And then you have Old Premium, which is over 20 years old. Now, when I say that this is 16 years old, in winemaking, you don't have to put the youngest, you don't have to put the oldest. So this wine may have stuff what's 40 years old, just to bring up the notes. So when you smell it, and I love this stuff, it's Christmas cake, it's sultanas, it's figs, it's dried fruit, it's ethanol, it's sweetness.
Yeah, it's Ribena for adults.
It's Ribena for adults.
Yeah,
when it's the palate, it just explodes, and it is that sweet, beautiful. Yeah, it's mince pie with lots of brandy.
Yeah,
it's undescribable, but this is where you can see how that in a barrel soaking into the wood being emptied out and then whiskey going into that wood, you can see where those flavors in the whiskey come from. And that's why I like showing it. But I just think fortifieds are fascinating because you're drinking history.
Yeah, it's such a cool and underrepresented kind of category and the history in Australia. But I might launch the poll for everyone now. Darren, you and I can see the results, so we'll keep it hush until the end. Keep
Okay.
it secretive. But if everyone can vote for their favorites, you can choose two. I will say as well, like with all their Morris tastings, we always include one of the fortifieds, and I'm pretty sure it's just because we love the opportunity to drink the fortifieds. It's just like, yeah, no, we definitely need that. It's really important. But it's such a, so my husband and I are massive fortified wine fans, and anytime we travel to a wine region, we hunt out the ones that make fortified wines. But it's such an interesting thing. I think that shift to table wine in the 50s probably came about because refrigeration was more common, and you didn't have to, drink your bottle, or otherwise it was gone instantly. So like refrigeration probably had something to do with it. And then you had the old guard dying off, not really drinking it as much. So hopefully I do encourage everyone to, if they find themselves in a wine region, to hit up somewhere that makes fortifieds, because we need to
you're more than welcome down to Rutherglen. We are building a new cellar door, should be open by the end of the year. But along with us, there's at least another 6 or 7 wineries around here, all doing superb fortified wines.
Yeah, I remember the first time I came to Rutherglen, there's a sign in the middle of a town, and it says, Sydney may have a great harbour, but Rutherglen's got a great port. And I cackle every time I think of that sign. It's absolutely beautiful. But yeah, Hugh just has a quick question as well before I announce the results. But he might have missed it. The still is steam heated or steam coil heated?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Steam coils just for safety.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have it's now a natural gas boiler, makes steam, and then we put steam into the coils.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. It is super interesting to see all the safety requirements now. And after having gone to Scotland and seeing all the safety that they require over there, I'm like, there's so many loosey-goosey things here.
Yeah. It's funny because Scotland, a lot is grandfathered in.
Yeah.
And they seem to be a little bit more lax, but look, at the end of the day, you want everybody to be safe, so it's worth doing.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I might share the poll with everybody. And unsurprisingly, the fortified muscat wine.
That is so close.
And the smoked muscat, I think the last time we did a tasting with you, I think the smoked muscat came out on top as well.
But I can't believe it's 55, 55, 34, 38. It's, yeah, you can't pick between them.
Yeah. Yeah. Easy. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. And of course, extra special thank you to Darren for taking your time out in the evening to chat to us. There we go. But yeah, thank you all for coming along and tuning in. So there is bottles for sale, but I do not have a link tonight. Ollie will email through the link tomorrow if there are any bottles you wanted to buy of the bottles that we have, which I don't know that we have that many left. But he will email through tomorrow the YouTube link and the link to purchase bottles. Obviously support local distilleries, but support local distilleries that make great product. And hopefully, if any of you get the chance to go visit Rutherglen and visit the distillery, hopefully I will go get to go see you soon, Darren. I'm overdue for a trip, but
I think you are.
definitely stop by. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful night. Darren, if you wanted to hang on for a bit, and I think Lara's somewhere as well. So take care, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, Emma, for hosting yet again a great tasting. Thank you.
No worries. You're one of my favorite people to chat to. Just like great whiskey, it's great fortified wine, something for everyone.
Yeah, I'm very lucky where I work and what I've got.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Take care.